entrepreneur and community well-being facilitator from East London. Her organization, the Brea Academy, brings joy, movement, and connection to older people through chair-based hip-hop dance. And her work sits at the intersection of community, culture, and well-being. And she's passionate about engaging those often left out of traditional health and fitness spaces, which is perfect because I'm definitely aligning with that. And she's also on her own journey of learning and how to live a life rooted in balance, care, and purpose. I bring to you Charlie Blair. Welcome, Charlie. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. An amazing intro. I'm well, pleased to be here, excited to get into this conversation. It's a big one, a loaded one for sure.
Yeah, definitely it is. And I think it brings out something for everybody because I think it's the stressful times, right, at the moment. Because when I usually mention to anyone what I do, they're like, oh my gosh, where were you a year ago? This happened, this happened, this happened. Everyone seems to have a story about it. So I guess a good place to start would be what would your story be with stress slash burnout?
Yeah, I think what kind of struck me when I first came across your work, I knew you from the dance world already, but when I came across the burnout prevention stuff that you were doing, was like, wow, there's like language for this thing that I've been experiencing and struggling with for so long. And there's other people that go through this as well. And there's ways that people have come up with to actually prevent this from happening. So I think, yeah, that notion of like, where were you a year ago? I can imagine that that's something that comes up like a lot because I feel like the term burnout or how we kind of commonly talk about it now, the language that we use is so different to a few years ago. So I think when I look back over my journey, burnout's probably been something that I've suffered with for the vast majority of my working life. I'm 31 now, and I'm a person who loves to go above and beyond in what they do, particularly when I care about my work. And most of the work that I've done throughout my career has been in the community, with people that I love and that I want to show up for. So I've always thought that, that was just part of my personality. I have a good work ethic. I'm able to be resilient and push through and show up. I've also experienced a lot of health conditions for the vast majority of my working life as well. And it's only been in the past couple of years that the link has become really clear between the two. So, yeah, I'm in a real place in my personal life of making sure that I'm looking after myself to be able to look after all of the other important people and things in my life. And I'm also, the owner of a company that employs 19 people. So I want to look after them and create a work environment and a work culture that doesn't encourage burnout. I want to be able to set a good example for my team that work with me as well.
I love what you said about setting a good example for the team, and we'll definitely come to that because I think the actual occupational side of burnout is a really big one from both sides, right? In terms of the people who are looking after the people and the people who are delivering whatever the business is, because I think it's different kinds of stresses that happen there. But speaking
Mm.
of stresses for you, because you mentioned that you feel like burnout has had a part of your entire working career, right? So for you, how does it show up in terms of like symptoms, in terms of experiences? How does it feel in your body? How do you know you're having to push through, like you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think sometimes I have conversations with people and they're like, oh, yeah, like I get tired too. Like everybody gets tired. And I try to explain that burnout is a really different thing. And I think for me, when I have long periods of time, like weeks in a row or months in a row, where I'm not getting a lot of rest, I'm not eating well, there's a lot of stress and responsibility and pressure on my plate, and I'm not taking time to process anything that I'm feeling. So for me, I know that things are kind of getting bad and approaching that burnout when I don't have the emotional capacity to like regulate myself. So I'll cry really easily. I'll be like
Mm,
breaking down, feeling a sense of like I can't do this, like panic, overwhelm.
mm,
I often will have panic attacks. Like I'll wake up in the morning filled with dread, thinking I just can't face the day. And to me, those are huge signals because, as I said earlier, I love what I do. So
mm,
when I wake up without that usual zest for life that I have, and I don't find joy in the things that I usually find joy in, that starts to signal to me like, okay, we're going into a bad place.
mm.
Um, yeah.
Hearing this, I think I definitely need to bring back one of my programs. It was called the Joyful Executive, and the whole idea was about bringing joy back in because I think it's something that isn't really spoken about enough within the burnout concept, but
Mm.
something that is a real anti-burnout tool. Um, but you mentioned quite a few of the symptoms there, which as I'm listening to it, I'm like, yep, 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 yep. Like if I was to be, giving like a diagnosis, because like, for example, two of the three main characteristics are emotional exhaustion, and you mentioned that being completely emotionally depleted. There's also depersonalization though, which shows up as cynicism, like you know what used to excite me doesn't excite me anymore, feeling a bit detached and things like that. So for you, as you're starting to see these things start to happen, because it sounds like one thing I would say as well, you mentioned about regulating, and crying is a form of regulation, actually. It's like how our body tries to deal with this overwhelm. But how do you maybe more consciously regulate yourself nowadays when those things start to come to the surface?
Yeah. So even this like understanding that I have of, oh, I think these are signs that I'm going into burnout, like this is all quite new and quite
Mm,
recent. So I've been running my business for 7 years now, and for the vast majority of that time, I really linked my worth and my likelihood of success
mm,
to my output. And I told myself that if I want this bad enough, I have to give it everything I've got. And I
mm,
was in a mindset where I was really prepared to sacrifice anything
mm,
to make sure that my business was a success. But I didn't actually anticipate that I'd be sacrificing my health
mm,
physically and mentally so much. So it is quite a newfound thing for me to have these signs start to come up and to
mm,
not think, okay, we just got to push through. Like, this is just the reality of being a business owner. I'm going to be the first one in the office, the last one out the office. Like, I've had
mm,
to really shift out of that like hustle culture mindset, and understand that when these things do start to come up, I have to address them quickly. And to be honest, I try to structure my life now in a way where it doesn't even get to that point where the red flags are coming. I try and build in the rest and the time for joy and the
mm,
movement and all of that stuff beforehand, so that it's kind of like prevention is better than cure. Because I find, again, when you hit that burnout place,
mm,
one, there can be like a lack of understanding. Like a lot of my friends and family will say to me, but you love what you do. Like,
mm,
and there's the presumption that if you get joy from your work, it can't burn you out because you enjoy what you do.
mm,
So I think there was a real thing for me in finding the other parts of my life that bring me joy and returning to those, because I was kind of reinforcing that idea in my head of like, yeah, I love this, so I'll give it everything. I'll sacrifice everything. I'm willing to burn myself out for it because I love it. So it took a lot of like conscious reframing to say, actually, my business and my work does bring me a lot of joy, but so do these other things.
mm,
And my work also brings me a lot of stress, and I need to manage that because it's not sustainable moving forward. And because I love the work I do, I want to stay in this space.
mm,
So I need to, develop a sustainable way to do that. And I also felt like a hypocrite in some capacity because like our slogan at the Blair Academy is health, happiness, and hip hop, right? So we're going around to all of these different community venues and I'm talking to people about how to stay healthy and happy, and hip hop is our weapon of choice to do that. And then I'm coming out and, I'm having panic attacks and I'm crying in the street. And yeah, it just hit me one day, like, actually, I feel kind of fraudulent, like going out there and encouraging people to stay healthy when in fact I'm not even looking after myself.
Mm.
So yeah, lots of realization, lots of reframing, lots of unfollowing accounts on Instagram that kind of reinforced a lot of
Yeah.
that like hustle culture
Mm.
mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of things, and I'm really glad you mentioned them all as well, because I mean, there's a question I'm going to ask you in a second, but we'll talk about the practical stuff first, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper. Is you mentioned like looking ahead, the preventative measures you've put. So you've gone through these experiences. You realize, like you said, you're having panic attacks. You're crying in the street. You're starting to see all these things happen as a result of you pushing past your limits. And then you recover from that, I'm assuming, and in that process, you start to realize the value of some of the things that keep you away from that level of stress, and then you start to implement that into your routines. I'm assuming daily, weekly, monthly, annual
Yeah.
plan. So you mentioned things like breaks, etc. But could you maybe think back to your planning, back to that space where you're like, okay, I need to change this pattern now. What kind of things did you put in place? Like you mentioned them briefly, but could you expand a little bit more about what your kind of like burnout prevention plan looks like?
Yeah, it took like kind of rock bottom moment for me to come up with the plan. I'd ended up in hospital
Mm.
maybe like 2 years ago now, and they were doing all of these tests and this and that. And when it came down to it, they were just like, you are exhausted, like in every capacity. And it really hit me like the damage that I was actually doing to myself. So my burnout prevention plan initially was very much like emergency plan, and that looked like pulling back and like bringing my responsibilities down to a bare minimum for the
Mm.
time being, because I was so depleted that the idea of like, right, I need a new routine and I need to do that, like the idea of having more work to do to get better made me feel more stressed.
Mm.
And I'm a person who, I love to research, I love to find out and learn about things. So as soon as I found out that I was experiencing burnout, I was online, I was watching stuff on YouTube, listening to the podcast, reading the books, getting burnout diaries. Like I hyper fixated because I wanted to get better so badly. And that just kept me burnt out for longer because it was just keeping me in that stress state. So the first thing that worked for me was initial big dropping of responsibilities, which was really hard for me to do. There was also the acceptance of my body can't do what I've been asking it to do for years and years and years. Like it's obviously not working. Like on paper I can do it, but in reality it doesn't work. So at that time I was working like 6 days a week, sometimes 7, often working in the evenings, waking up 3-4 a.m. to do extra work beforehand. Like I had no life, no existence outside of that. So yeah, initial step was lessen the responsibilities, super time, like rest, deep relaxation. And then yeah, as I started to come back, it was about building a timetable that looked very different. So I'm a very structured person. I like to have my diary, calendar, everything organized. So what worked for me was scheduling in rest and other things that bring me joy in the same way that I schedule in meetings, bookings, work, etc. If it's not in the diary for me, it like doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. So I've had to be like as regimented as I am with work, with rest.
Mm.
And then I also found like I was exploring a lot of tools like breath work and meditation and yoga. But again, I was waiting until kind of the crisis point where I was like having a panic attack to try and employ those methods.
Right.
So what I find now is that regularly, almost daily, I do breath work, meditation, and yoga. That has recalibrated my nervous system a bit, so that now when I'm faced with those stressful moments or the panic attacks, I have a better foundation to kind of deal with it. Whereas before I was like in the height of the stress and I'd be like, okay, let me try and meditate and do some breath work, and that it was just adding to the stress. So I realized that I had to draw back and change my routines so that all of things, as well as the rest and the other things that bring me joy, were like routinely scheduled in. For some people that kind of structure is off-putting, but I really need that to commit and to kind of trick my brain into understanding that rest is as important as being productive. So if it's in the diary, it must be important, so I have to do it.
Definitely. And I used to have these things called Andre days where I'd block them out and I would put them as busy in my calendar so no one can book it in. And I used to have it like maybe once a month. And it was so difficult to keep it though, because you know that there's nothing going on that day. So hypothetically, you could do the things that you're being asked of, but it takes a certain kind of mental discipline and boundary setting to say that me using my time is just as valuable as work using my time or a friend using my time, because I wouldn't double book someone else. So why would I double book myself? There's something you mentioned which I found really important actually when working with clients, is the idea of adding something to the process to be able to deal with burnout can be just as stressful as the burnout itself. Right? All of a sudden you're like, where am I going to find time to do breath work and take up the gym? When am I going to start doing all this stuff? Like, you want me to journal? I can't even think. Like, all this kind of stuff starts happening. And I'm really glad you mentioned what we call the subtraction bias. It's the idea that usually we look at addition to solve problems. What do I need to do? But actually there's a to-don't list as well. Like, what do I need to get rid of? And when we start to look at things through that visor of like, what is completely mandatory, like we cannot live without this thing, and what isn't, then you start to realize actually a lot of the things we're doing is self-imposed, and we can, or at least we can change the way we experience it. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's a lot of people out there who are probably overwhelmed at the thought of starting a wellness plan, when actually it can start by taking things off first.
And I used to feel like almost offended sometimes when people would give me advice, well-meaning advice, like things that worked for them. I'd think like, no way, like I've already got enough on my plate and now you want me to think about this extra thing. Like it just felt like more pressure. And I think when you do that, like prioritizing that you explained, where you look at what's really urgent, negotiable, and what can come down here, you realize that you are putting so much additional pressure on yourself. There wasn't somebody, like some external factor going, hey Charlie, have you done this? Have you done this? It was me. I was creating deadlines that didn't need to exist, and putting urgency on tasks that could wait, or holding on to tasks that absolutely could be delegated. But I felt really offended when people would say like, you're in control, because I received that as it's your fault. It's your fault that you're suffering. It's your fault that you're burnt out, and that just made me feel even worse about myself. So it's so hard to really trick your brain and go, whoa, no, that's not how we're thinking about this. I know you used to think this was really urgent, but it's not. I was giving you the wrong information for a long time. This is not that urgent.
Listen, and it's really, because I think now is a good time to kind of shift into what I was going to talk about, which is the bit, I guess, below the tactical things that you do, is how you shift the beliefs. Because you can fake it till you make it, which is great. Like, someone do something, someone advises something, you read a book, and you're like, okay, I need to do this. So you do it, and then you feel better. But for lasting change, you kind of need to believe it to be true. And it's interesting the wording you use, that you tricked your brain into X, Y, and Z, when X, Y, and Z is actually the truth. Like,
Yeah.
you are actually in control. So it can feel like a trick, but it's actually the other way around. The trick that's been played on the brain is that we're not in control, is that it is our fault, is that, we shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z, and we should be doing 100 things. When actually the truth is that we don't have to do those things, because when we don't, the world still continues and things still get done. So for you, what was that shift in belief like, from going from that, I have to do everything now? And there's a podcast episode we've got with a guy called Dylan Brown, and he talks about what is a now problem versus a not a now problem. So how did you go from that shift mentally of everything needs to be done now and a certain way, till it overwhelms you and brings you to this point of breakdown, tears, and anxiety, to where you are now, which is able to implement this like sustainable burnout prevention plan and actually deal with things differently?
I didn't do it alone, that's for sure.
Amazing.
I had like a year with a therapist, um, just like talking therapies. I'd had cognitive behavioral therapy in the past and talking therapies on the NHS.
Mm,
Hadn't really found like resolution from either. So I sought out a charity in Hackney called the Centre for Better Health, which were phenomenal when I went to them. And they arranged for me to have weekly sessions with a counsellor. And it was in that space, to be honest, that I did a lot of the work in even understanding those things like, oh, wait, my sense of self worth is really linked to my productivity. And I actually realized that as a child, I'd grown up in very kind of tumultuous circumstances. There was lots of domestic violence at home, lots of chaos, and I was constantly looking for ways to take control because I felt very out of control and very helpless at the time. And I think I've always been very studious. I've always excelled academically. That's always been my like space. So I think from a young age, I learned to keep myself busy through work and study so that I didn't have to feel the big, heavy emotions that were going on
mm,
at the time. And I think that is really what like sustained this kind of notion of like going in and out of burnout through lots of the years in my life, because I was just so used to it. Like that was honestly my coping mechanism. Like, okay, when things get tough, I just dive into work. And I always kind of like joked with people like, oh, I'm so lucky, like my coping mechanism's so healthy. Like some people drink, gamble, take drugs. Like I just work all the time. Like that's it's so good. And I honestly didn't see like a problem with it. So I had to do a lot, as I say, with the support of my therapist to understand like, oh,
mm,
like, yeah, I am a hardworking person, but there's also this subconscious thing that's been underpinning a lot of this that tells me, one, to stay busy so that I don't have to feel everything, and
mm,
two, this notion of like, if I can just get better, if I can just show them how great I am, they're going to love me and they're going to give me the support that I need. So I think, there was also that element like growing up, being able to come home and say, I got all A's and A stars in my exams, and
mm.
I've gone to uni and I've got a degree. I really enjoyed going to my parents and my family and being like, look at me. I'm good enough, aren't I? Like tell me that.
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think, like it came, yeah, through therapy, that the understanding of like actually like I have so much value in this life, in this world,
Mm,
um, in my entirety. I'm a multifaceted being, and I give and receive in life, in so many different ways. So
mm,
yeah, it was again that feeling of like I don't have to attribute my whole personality and all of the joy that comes from my life to work. Like
mm,
there's no shame in rest and enjoyment. But again, growing up, that was quite a shameful thing. There was always something to be done. I'm the oldest of six. My mum was extremely hardworking, working multiple jobs. You weren't laying on the sofa. You weren't having a Andre day, a Charlie day. Like there was always something to be done, to play part of the team, to be part of the village that kept the household going.
Yeah.
So it's been really strange to, yeah, like sit on the sofa and be like, okay, mum's not gonna mum's not gonna come into my house all these years later and be like, what are you doing sitting down, there's things to do. uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's a really inherent thing, and I think you should, if you're experiencing burnout and you're thinking about kind of making changes moving forward, I think it is really important to do that kind of deep work of assessing, okay, where does this actually come from? Because I
Mm.
thought I knew where it came from, but I knew the kind of surface level.
Right.
And actually, when I dig deeper, that was what really prompted me to change, because it made me sad. I was like, oh, I don't feel that way about myself. I love myself and I do believe that I have value. So I don't want to treat myself like that anymore. Like,
Mm.
oh, oh no. You know, I felt really sad that I'd put my mind and my body through so much, and that ultimately my body was just trying to protect me when it was doing these things. I viewed it as such a negative. I was like, why isn't my body like against me? Why isn't it cooperating? Why is it stopping me from doing what I love? But
Mm.
actually, it was just trying to protect me. So yeah, I had to look at the real cause and shift that
Mm.
narrative in my head.
And it takes a lot of work, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we do rely on different things, right? Some of us rely on friends and family, some of us rely on ourselves, like we
Mhm.
go inwards, which is great if it's possible to do that. But sometimes there's something that needs to be done with someone who's a trained professional. And you mentioned therapy, you mentioned counseling, you mentioned CBT, you mentioned
Mm.
all these things that you went out and spent money to effectively, to help solve the problem, to understand yourself, so you can shift that mentally. And I do therapy, so I know the journey is not an easy road to walk as well, because I think I always complain that online people make therapy look like a walk in a park. It is only a walk in a park if you've had the session and you have so much to deal with. You need a walk in a park just to give yourself the mind to process it, which I have done literally hours walking.
Exhausted.
Oh my days.
Mm.
You're like, what? My entire foundation of belief of reality has just been shaken. And now you're like, see you next week.
Yeah,
Like, so,
therapy was like huge for me in the sense
yeah.
of how valuable it was, but how depleting it was at the same time. Like it was really emotionally exhausting in some of those sessions. So like for me, I had to have my sessions of an evening,
Mm,
because I'd had counseling before where I had sessions like in the morning or during the day, and I found it extremely difficult to
mm,
leave the heaviness of that conversation and then like go about my day. Like that was really, I don't know, just like discombobulating for me. I couldn't do it. So yeah, it's like noticing things like that. Like I always had my sessions in the evening. I
mm,
always, luckily I was able to do it. Not everybody is, but I had budgeted some money aside so that every week I could get a cab home from therapy, because again, I was usually quite emotional, a
yeah.
bit distressed, like, you know, I was in a bit of a state afterwards, and the thought of getting on the train and then the tube and then walking home was just like, oh no. So that was a boundary I put in place for myself of like, no, every week on my therapy day, I get a taxi home. I don't cook on that day. I eat whatever I want, whatever makes me happy. I order good food. I watch whatever show I'm watching at the time. Like, you know,
Mm,
it really became like a ritualistic thing of like, okay, I know therapy takes it out of me. So I'm going to
mm,
make sure that, you know, my Tuesday evenings when I go to therapy are as light as possible, and my Wednesday mornings as well when I've woken up post therapy are as light as possible.
mm,
So yeah, it takes a hell of a lot of work to stay committed to it, and to face yourself in that way,
mm.
and to open up and, you know, be vulnerable with essentially a stranger, like to tell them some of the, you know, most private thoughts that you have.
Mm.
Um, But yeah, it was invaluable for me. Like I was so upset when my time there came to an end. I could only be with the organization for up to a year.
Right.
So yeah, I was like, what am I gonna do? Like it became such a staple part of my routine to like have that safe space to go to every week and
Mm.
yeah, work out whatever I needed to to work out and feel held and feel validated and feel seen and understood. So yeah, I have a new therapist now. I didn't last very long without a therapist because
Mm.
yeah, I need that.
And you know, one thing I'll say as well, because there's probably someone here listening thinking of, because what I find is that therapy has it can be a bit of a taboo still in certain cultures. For example, the idea of what kind of person does therapy, like the idea of it, may not match with who they believe themselves to be. Whereas for me now, after doing it, I realized that therapy is like a preventative measure. In the same way as how you go to the GP for your body, you need to go to a therapist for the mind. And it can be grueling. It's like going for surgery, right? I had surgery last year, put me out for 3, 4 months, and then there was still recovery after that. And psychologically, it'd be the same thing. But once you come out to the other side of it, you're stronger than you were before, which can help
Mm,
you deal with things differently moving forward.
absolutely.
So I definitely wanted to add that because I know there's going to be someone listening thinking, "Oh, that sounds terrible. I don't want to get involved
Yeah,
in that."
it's like necessary evil. It's like have
Mm,
to do this hard work in order to lighten the load and have a better, more enjoyable life moving forward. And I also think it's like a generational thing as well. Like when I was looking back at family circumstances and the history of like mental health in my family, it
mm,
really struck me that nobody had really taken the time to process anything that had happened to them. Nobody had had any professional support at navigating anything. My grandma was schizophrenic, she had a stillborn baby.
mm,
My dad was an alcoholic, his dad was an alcoholic, like so many things. And I started mapping it out where I was like, oh, I think everyone's struggling because they didn't have any help in navigating these big things that
mm,
most people would need help navigating. So I think, what you say about the mind and the body is so true because people don't feel the same sense of shame often in going to the GP. Some
mm,
people still do. Some people have their health problem and talk to nobody and.
mm,
But I think we're a lot more willing to talk about our physical problems than we
mm.
are to talk about something that we might be dealing with or struggling with mentally. And there's the association that if you struggle with your mental health, you're crazy or you're unwell or
Mm,
all of these things. So I think we're moving into a different time now where the conversations that we have, the language that we use, it's all very different. And I think for the most part, it's quite positive.
mm,
Um, but as I say, it's like a battle because if I go onto my social media, for instance, my algorithm is like a 50-50 split. Like half of it is telling me to rest and to,
mm,
do the self-care and it's talking to me about complex PTSD and all of this stuff. And then the other side is like, how bad do you want this? Are
yeah.
you a dream chasing CEO? Like, so I see the battle in front of me and it's a battle that most people they'll see a post that will say, therapy is so hard. You'll see another post that said therapy is the best thing I've ever done. Like,
Mm,
you can't be too influenced by the experiences of other people because it's a really personal thing. Every therapist is different, every type of therapy is different. Like at the moment, I'm in EMDR therapy,
gotcha.
which is really popular, like with kind of trauma survivors.
Mm,
So, there's a lot of different types of therapy, there's a lot of different therapists. So you
mm,
can find someone that you resonate with. You don't have to settle for the first therapist you come
mm,
across. If you don't feel the vibes right, you don't connect with that person, you don't see yourself eventually opening up to that person, move on. It's like speed dating, go and get another one. But again, I acknowledge the privilege that I was able, although it was still subsidized, I was able to pay for that service. If you go to the NHS and you're allocated a therapist, that's that. And I've had that experience. And my therapist on the NHS left halfway through my 12-week program, which like added to my abandonment issues, and it was very productive, you know. So as much as I wave the flag for therapy and I'm like, go for it, I encourage a vast majority of my friends to get into therapy, whether they feel like they have an issue with their mental health or not. I also acknowledge that there are a lot of barriers that people face, whether it is financial, whether it is the kind of cultural stuff that surrounds therapy. So I'm very careful, although I'm encouraging it, and like everyone I speak, I'm like, please go to therapy. It will change your life. I also acknowledge that for some people it isn't that simple. But there are also a lot of great resources online now. You know, through the mess, you can find some really good places of support. I follow a lot of pages about anxiety and you know, giving different methods to come out of a panic attack and things like that. But it really is about what works for you. You know, for some people, picking up their phone and seeing posts about therapy makes them feel overwhelmed. For me, it's like, oh yeah, oh, see, I'm doing therapy. So yeah, I encourage people to start that path of seeking a therapist or researching about the type of therapy that you might like to do, or speaking to some other people that have had therapy just to understand their experience. So if you're not quite ready, whatever the reason may be, to take that jump, at least start to do some of the learning around what therapy might look like, because it was completely different to like the preconceived idea that I had in my head. I thought we were going to go in and do like a timeline of like all of my trauma and have all of these really hard conversations, but it didn't work like that. And it was very much like showing up on the day and doing whatever I needed for that day. I thought it was going to be like so much planning from my end, and again like more work for me to go home and do, but I had an amazing experience. I was also really resistant to having a male therapist, but I had the best time with my male therapist, Matt. He was fantastic. So yeah, try and shrug off like some of the preconceived ideas that you might have, and just be open-minded to something that might help.
Otherwise, we're blocking our blessings, right? Like one of the things that comes to mind as well is that coaching and therapy can often be confused a lot, but therapy is looking into the past, dealing with the traumas, finding out how we got here, and then coaching is looking ahead at where we want to go. And it's you'll find that they're linked, because where you feel like you want to go might be different if you're healed versus unhealed. So where you think is possible for you, whether you think is right for you, all these kind of things can often depend on who you believe yourself to be. And it's difficult to do that if you haven't looked inward to deal with the questions that we probably have avoided. And one of the things I hear a lot is it's easier to help someone else than it is to help ourselves. And it's true, because it means that even if you were to read all the books, even if you were to go to therapy and do all the shadow work, if you can't be honest with yourself, then the change doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go for it.
I was going to say, I think there's honesty with yourself, but also a kindness with yourself and a grace. Sometimes I would catch myself kind of speaking to myself in my head, and I'd think, I would never say that to a friend or a colleague or a person that I love. I would never make them feel that way about themselves. So why am I so comfortable doing it with myself? And I wouldn't tolerate anybody else in my life making me feel bad about myself in that way. So why do I allow myself to do it to myself? It's things like self-limiting beliefs that you might not even realize that you have. And I think a lot of us have this notion of like, oh, it's just the way I am, or I've always been this way, or you know, my parents are like that and I'm like that, or whatever it might be. But yeah, when you start to dig deeper, you realize that some of these things are like inherently who you are. They're part of what society and the world of life has shaped you to be.
You know, there was this anecdote about this young girl, and she was asking her mother why they cut the legs off the turkey to put it in the oven. And the mother couldn't answer it. So she said, "Oh, you're going to have to ask grandma. I'm just doing what she always did." So she went to grandma, asked her the same question. And she was like, "Oh, I just always asked my mom. It's just what she always did." Unfortunately, you know, her great grandmother was still alive. So she went over to her great grandma and she asked great grandma, "Why do we cut the legs off the turkey when we put it in the oven?" And she says, "Oh, because the oven was too small." And obviously, when you actually extrapolate that message, now we have bigger ovens, so we don't need to cut. So, but there was a purpose at the time. So what we find is that a lot of the things that we believe are fact are often just habit that we learned from our parents. And once you realize that, then you realize actually I don't need to do this. I don't need to carry this belief. I don't need to do this activity all the time. I don't need to overwork myself. Actually, I can rest and not feel guilty about it because I've
Yeah.
done so much, you know, and I don't even need a reason to not feel
Mhm.
guilty, you know, because I need it. And it's not something that's a privilege, it's the need of a human condition, you know,
Mhm.
which can feel like an attack to them, you know, sometimes. But as we kind of like rounding up the session, I'd love to hear. We covered a lot of ground today. We talked about stress. We talked about burnout. We talked about burnout prevention plan. We talked about therapy. We talked about all these different things. What do you think
Mhm.
is something we maybe haven't spoken about that is part of this conversation that maybe we should?
I think the thing that's missing is having these conversations in an appropriate way with children. So
Mm.
I think when I was looking back, when I started to do like the breath work and meditation and yoga, I was like a bit annoyed that nobody had
Got it.
showed me those tools before. And I was a
Mm.
bit like, wait, so I've gone through all this education, you know, I've got a first class degree, and
Mm.
nobody showed me how powerful my own breath was.
Mm.
I've got a dance degree, and nobody taught me about the links between movement and nervous system regulation.
Mm.
And it really like annoyed me because I thought I've been suffering unnecessarily all this time. If somebody
Mm.
had taught me the importance of these things and how to manage my emotions and how to notice when I was overwhelmed, when I was really tired, I wouldn't be the burnt out adult of today. So
Yeah.
I think the thing that's missing is working out a way to do this where we're teaching children these things about their emotional regulation, about their mental health, and about um, you know, kind of what's really important in life and what
Mm.
we should prioritize and what we shouldn't, and how we should look after ourselves in order to look after the other people that we care about.
Mm.
Um, so I think, yeah, a way to kind of continually honor rest and play and joy would be like my dream, because I think once you get to 18 it's like, yeah, that's it, like childhood's over, adult life's here now, and you're expected to just go along with,
Mhm.
roll with the motions. And now I feel like I've reverted back to like my childhood self. I do lots of
Mm.
coloring and I have lots of like crafts, and I just bought a Nintendo Switch to like play
Uh-huh.
some cute games. So, you know, all of the things that people kind of told you off for like being immature, or, you
Mm.
know, it's like, yeah, going back to the things that bring you joy, and not feeling bad about them. So yeah, I'd love to just radically change like every school curriculum, and
Mm.
yeah, make sure it's in there, because I think a lot of the difficulties that we're having as a society now, and a lot of the problems that we're seeing with mental health, wouldn't be in the place that they are if we were teaching children this stuff. And we're definitely moving in that direction. Like some of the schools that I work with, they do meditation with the kids. And my godson, he's 5, and he comes to me like, Auntie, I'm going to do my breathing because I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. And I'm like,
Mm.
so good. So hopefully we're moving in that direction. But yeah, I'd love for it to be something that is part of the conversation throughout our childhood, and yeah, isn't something that we have to deal with as an emergency in our adulthood.
I guess there's movies like Inside Out, which is like a children's movie for adults, teaching
Yeah.
us about emotions and how they work,
Mhm.
etc. I definitely see that shift happening as well. I've got some godchildren who, like, same as what you're saying, what they're saying, I'm like, wow, this sounds like the new age, you know. It is incredible, and I'm really happy to see that. And it'll be interesting to see what it looks like to have a generation of young people who are able to regulate themselves and to acknowledge their thoughts and all that kind of stuff, and validate themselves instead of looking externally for that validation as well. It'll be a whole different kettle of fish. I think it'll be
It
interesting.
really will. And it will infiltrate into every bit of society, crime prevention,
Yeah.
pools on the NHS, mental health, like so many things that we see would be drastically changed if we could implement that. So I'm hopeful, I'm an optimist. I think the future's bright. We're learning more and more, we're getting better and better, we're having conversations like this which normalize things and, put things out into the mix for anyone and everyone to listen to. So we're getting there, and we're part of the good movement, I think.
That's it, 100%. And as we close up, how can people get in touch with you? How can they take one of your classes and regulate their nervous systems and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can go to our website, theblairacademy.com. Most of the work that we do is in residential care homes for older people, but we also have a lot of community classes that are open to anyone and everyone that just wants to come, move their bodies, feel good, meet cool people. So yeah, we have regular free sessions that are listed on our website. You can check us out on Instagram and YouTube at The Blair Academy. And I'm also on LinkedIn if there's anyone that wants to connect with me. I love talking, so I'm always happy to connect with a fellow founder, another artist, just another human that wants to talk about life and burnout and business and all of that good stuff. So yeah, don't feel away in reaching out to me. I'm a very open book, and I love a chat.
I love to hear it, Charlie. Thank you so much for being here on the Water Relief podcast. And I'm sure we'll have to bring you back again, because there's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of people who are wanting to engage with you in some way, shape, or form. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, you're so welcome. Anytime. I'm glad to come back.
All right, cool. So then it's done. So how was it for you, real quick?
Great. It was just like like I said, I'm a conversation person, so these things feel very natural to me. I'm just chatting away like I would to anyone that will listen.
I love it. Absolutely love it. All right, so what we'll do now then is we'll record the intro. So in terms of the structure, it's, hey, I'm Charlie talking to Andre on the Water Relief podcast. We spoke about 1, 2, 3. I hope you enjoy the show.
Cool.
Yeah. So whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Charlie, and I'm here talking to Andre on the Water Relief podcast. We're discussing all things burnout, business, and therapy. So I hope you enjoy the episode.
Boom. Perfect. All right, cool. Let's do that. So I'm gonna stop it now.